Today is Stephen King's 73rd birthday. Happy birthday, Mr. King. You have been a constant in my life since 1978. My introduction to Stephen King came while I was sitting in the cafeteria at Delta College in University Center, Michigan. While Delta College may never be spoken of with the same reverence as Yale or Princeton or Cambridge, without Delta College, which then was occasionally described as the last refuge for losers, I'd have considered myself lucky to be hired and gainfully employed as the overnight assistant manager at the 24-hour self-serve Clark Station in Prudenville, Michigan. Delta College put me on a good road. Without that school, well, I hate to imagine. I was not, as family and friends from the time will confirm, a boy of goals, large or small. Well, I did have one goal. It involved women's breasts. But I digress. I was a boy whose goals were completely out of my reach. There isn't much use for a high school dropout from a small town in northern Michigan in this world, not even in the world I dreamed of. I was going to be in broadcasting and work in radio, and that was going to be my career. Through a simple bit of Forrest Gumpian luck, I was allowed to enroll at Delta College in the radio-television curriculum. For the first time in my life, a distant dream triggered a future goal. With the help of folks like Len Marsico and Guy Surmgart and Carolyn and Jeffrey Holmes, along with Tom Knob and Gary Linkowski and Janine Woods, I was actually learning something and wanted to learn more. To that end, when folks took 12 credit hours, I took 15. While some of my fellow students worked 15 hours at the TV station, I worked 20, 25, 30, even 40. I wanted all of the classes. I wanted all of the volunteer hours. I worked at the college TV station. I was living my own life fantasy as a reality. But as they say, all work. As a loud and gregarious and boorishly noisy and annoying person, my history tainted me. Instead of dating and hanging out with people, smoking many joints and drinking many pitchers of dark beer at the Michigan House just down the road after classes, I lived in other worlds and read. On a particular day in 1978, between a morning and afternoon class, I finished reading the novel All Heads Turn When the Hunt Goes By, which was written by John Ferris. As I recall, it wasn't a bad work by any means, quite enjoyable, really. The book was done and sitting on the table in front of me. And now I had nothing to do but stare at a wall or read something in my textbook. As fate would have it, a college friend who was also a reader was sitting nearby. We yacked for a few minutes, discussed classes, and she asked what I had been reading. I told her the story. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a hardback book and handed it to me. "Read this guy. He's pretty good." What she handed to me was the short story collection Night Shift. It was written by someone I had never heard of. Steve something or other would be the way I described it. I thanked her as she left. That night, at my grandparents' house, where I was staying while in school, I read the first story. It was called Jerusalem's Lot. I hated it. Bored me to tears. It was written in a style that I have never liked, and still do not. Found diary entries. I put the book on my dresser, turned off the light, probably touched myself, and went to sleep. I made a mental note to return the book. This just wasn't for me. But things happen. During lunch the next day, for want of anything else to do, I pulled out Night Shift and read the second story. It was called Graveyard Shift. And to run to the punchline, it scared me to tears. Literally. I got wrapped up in that story as if I was living the story. Fear gripped me. I was paralyzed in that fear. My breath was short and tears streamed. This was more like it. By the end of the day, between classes, I had finished Night Shift. Some stories were scary, some touching. The stories the last rung on the ladder and the woman in the room showed the other side of good old Stevie What's-His-Name, the tender side. Not tears of fear, tears of sadness and sorrow. The next one I read was The Shining. Bought the paperback at the Walden's bookstore in Fashion Square Mall in Saginaw, Michigan. Guess what? Scared me. Couldn't stop turning pages. That was followed by Stephen's telling of What If Dracula Moved to Maine story. Salem's Lot was that book. Between Danny Glick tapping at the window, the gravedigger screaming, "Stop looking at me!" and a baby with chocolate pudding dribbling down its chin, I was freaking out big time. Tears of fear and paralysis. I had to put down the book more than twice just because I couldn't take it anymore. But I finally finished it. It was a worthy thrill ride. In the meantime, I continued reading John Saul and Dean Koontz, and anything that had the name Ray Bradbury attached to it. In September of 1978, Doubleday published The Stand. 823 pages of bad things are going to happen to good people. It was by far the largest book I had ever purchased. It was also, aside from college books, the first hardcover book I bought. It cost me $12.95, plus tax, at the aforementioned Walden Books. In 1978 dollars, that's a fair amount of either weed for me or gasoline for the bright orange Pontiac Ventura that I drove. I think I made the right choice. Took a week to read because those damned classes kept interfering. 42 years later, I still have that book, with the original cover. In August of 1979, I was working as a cameraman at WNEM TV5. I had been there just over a year, and began that job at about the same time I first read The Stand. Chuck Alvey made the wise or foolish choice and let me be a member of the TV5 team. I was living the dream big time, working at the same television station I dreamed of working as a boy while watching Captain Muddy and laughing at Hoss the Talking Horse every afternoon after school as a boy. I was actually doing what I dreamed of doing. How the hell did that happen? Also in August, The Dead Zone was published. It was slightly different. It wasn't scary as in, boo, here's something jumping out of the closet. It was thoughtful and introspective. The story of a man given a curse or a gift. Who's to say? It was a one-night read. The story of Johnny Smith really touched me. I felt what he was facing. It was, I believe, Stephen King's first perfect novel. Everything he had been working toward with his short stories and his first 6 novels, and I am including Rage and The Long Walk, Bachman books, in this count, gelled perfectly. Since then, he has written 6,300,004 more books, give or take. But none have achieved the perfection of The Dead Zone. There is no cliché on the pages, no tripping in the doorway while the story moves along. With that book, I became something that hadn't even been invented yet. I became a constant reader. When I read his salutation to my constant reader, I read it as, "Thank you, Scott." Since I was first introduced to good old Steve What's-His-Name, I have picked up each new Stephen King novel the day it was released. Walden Books is no more, nor is there a B. Dalton, but there is still a Barnes & Noble down the road a piece, and there is Amazon. Stephen King has been the one constant in my life. Authors I have read have come and gone. Many times I just lost interest in their stories. But Stephen King is still with me. I stayed in broadcasting for my entire working career. I worked in radio. I worked as a corporate and industrial television director traveling the world and the country. I've done voiceover narration, and now I record audiobooks for beer money. A boy's dream, a man's life, with only the occasional "what the hell was I thinking" about nightmare or two thrown in to remind me how lucky I have been. I'll never be able to thank Stephen King for being part of my life and creating the people and the stories that he has. He's been there for the high points of my life and for the dark low points when I lived in what seemed to be a depression that would never ever end. He's also pushed through his own demons and monsters along the way, but he kept his stories coming. I'll never get a phone call from Simon & Schuster or King himself asking if I have the time to narrate one of his novellas or short stories or novels. Not gonna happen. Still, I remain a constant reader as long as he cares to share his work. Delta College and Stephen King in the year 1978 both impacted my life in ways I would not have thought possible or could have imagined. I've come a long way since then. Still a bit of an odd duck, but I hope in the good way. Happy birthday, Mr. King, and thank you from a constant reader.